Good day, everybody. Welcome to my interpersonal communication project. My name is Camille Lovell, and I am a student at Liberty University. So what I wanted to briefly open my communication project with is a quote that I had read in one of my textbooks, Stewart 2012. He says that perception is shaped by the perceiving person's experience and understanding of his or her place in the world. And that's definitely a quote that I use to kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. So looking at my presentation, some of the things that I wanted to discuss is 1, my overall communication goal, 2, behavioral blends, 3, communication barriers, 4, some resources and strategies that I can use to address these communication barriers, and 5, the action plan that I'm going to be using to just increase my ability to be an effective communicator. So in looking at my overarching communication goal, and as a practice and addictions counselor, my goal is to grow into an empathetic, informed, and ethical communicator. So what that means for me is I aim to first increase my ability to practice empathy in my communication events with people. So that's about practicing active listening, having appropriate body language, eye contact, tone and inflection in the way that I speak with people, as well as my ability to put myself in the person that I'm communicating with shoes and to really experience them on their terms and the way that they experience life. To be an informed communicator to me means to increase my awareness and efficacy both personally and professionally with my communication events. You know, like I said, as an addictions counselor, I want to consistently improve my ability to communicate hope, safety, and prosperity to people who otherwise don't have that level of either satisfaction or safety in life and with life experiences. So going back to being an informed communicator, I definitely want to also increase my awareness of my personal communication challenges. And I can only do that if I strive to be informed in the way that I communicate. And then the last of my goals is to practice that ethical piece. So to be an ethical communicator, which means to facilitate and maintain the safety of everybody that I communicate with. When we talk about setting appropriate communication boundaries to provide ethical services in my professional realm, these are all things that I believe are going to very intently help me in my communication efforts. So kind of getting into the behavioral blends that I mentioned earlier, through Carbonell and through the Uniquely You assessment, all the students were allowed to, develop this personality profile through answering some questions. And then we were given kind of a personality blend that really described who we were as communicators. So I scored as a competent influencing specialist. So before we even get into that, what is a personality blend? So I best describe a personality blend as a unique set of behavioral and personality traits, that exist in kind of a 4-disc personality graph or type. So the D in the disc stands for active, task-oriented. The I stands for active, people-oriented. The S stands for passive, task-oriented. The C stands for passive, task-oriented, and the S stands for passive, people-oriented. So understanding what my personality blend is, or behavioral blend, or the personality and behavioral blends of others can increase my ability to communicate effectively with people, because it allows me to not only put their behaviors or their actions in perspective, but to also act in somewhat of a way of being sensitive to what I know really adds to, the intricacies of someone's personality. Maybe there's topics that aren't really topics that we should talk about at this point in the relationship, or, different ways to really help people strengthen other areas of their personality, right? So when I'm looking at a little bit about me and my personality blend, a little bit of history is that I am Seventh-day Adventist. I grew up Seventh-day Adventist. So a part of being in an organized religion, you have the ability to have that religion also influence some of the culture that you grow up in, and then ultimately influence some of the identity that you grow up with. So understanding how my personality profile has been influenced by a lot of my experience as a Seventh-day Adventist has given me keen insight to, the different challenges that I have with communication, as well as the unique strengths that I have. Going forward, something that I would really like to do, or an aim of mine, is to more deeply blend my personal identity, my goals, both personally and professionally, as well as my life journey as a Christian. And I'm going to be able to do these things only through, one, trying to meet these goals, but two, increasing this awareness that I have of myself, right? So the way that the personality blends are broken down, they give us a this is expected of me and this is me graph. And those graphs basically teach you the little bit of difference between how people perceive you and many times what your intentions are with communication. So basically what that means is sometimes we're interpreted in ways that we don't necessarily intend. And when we get two graphs that are dissimilar, which is what I received in my case, it gives me a little bit of insight. One, to show that perhaps there are certain strengths or weaknesses that I have in my communication that I need to address, but more so understanding that I do have the personality blend that shapes and molds the way that I communicate based on my audiences. And that, like I had mentioned before, can be both a strength and a weakness if it's not cultivated correctly. Conversely, the quite opposite can be true. So if you have two very similar graphs, sometimes it shows that the intricacies in communication might not necessarily be there. So understanding what your personality blend is and how your personality blend influences the way that you're perceived can really be helpful in being a better communicator. So some of the communication barriers that I found that I have was definitely eye-opening. That's what I can say. The two main communication barriers that I found, or that spoke to me the most, was one, this identity that I briefly mentioned, and then also meta messages. So identity is something that is formed through our experiences, through our communication events, through all of these different things. So in a study done by Dunkel and Harp in 2017, they did a review on Erik Erikson's stages of development. And what they found is that when individuals have challenges in the identity versus role confusion stage, it actually can create some infidelity when it comes to character development. And that's definitely something that I wanted to work on. I look at the way that some of the social challenges that I've had, at what stage they came into my life, and I can get a pretty good idea on how that's overall impacted my ability to communicate. Also meta messages, which is something I was initially very resistant to, but meta messages are basically the concept as discussed by Tannen in Stewart 2012, and it really speaks to the fact that relationships in communication are really the driving force. So you know how they say, don't shoot the messenger? That's kind of basically what meta messages are about. We have to understand that a person's relationship with the person sending the message can equally be a part of the communication event that determines what the outcomes of that communication event are. So looking at some resources and strategies for me to overcome these different challenges. First, I am referring to Peterson in his flat brain theory. So basically that theory highlights the relationship between the stomach, or the visceral feeling that we get when we have different emotions, the heart, as well as the head. All of these different areas of our bodies work together to help us resolve different situations or communication events that we have with people, just to give us the most well-rounded communication event possible. Creating positive relationships with people, that's definitely something that was talked about in France and Weichel. And using empathy, warmth, and genuineness and alliance is crucial to that. And then self-disclosure. We know that self-disclosure needs 3 features: self-awareness, self-acceptance, and trust with the person receiving the communication event. And those are definitely elements that I'm going to be looking to incorporate in the future. And those are discussed by Johnson 2012. So my action plan is looking at 5 particular steps. Those are: 1, to actively familiarize myself with my identity and the influence that it has on my behavioral blend. Number 2, to practice a non-judgmental exploration of myself. And that's with Carbonell 2008 and Stern, Patton, and Heen 2012. Number 3, to practice acknowledgement and acceptance of meta messages, as I mentioned, by Tannen. 4, to increase my awareness and personal use of communication traps, as discussed by Peterson. And 5, to continuously practice spiritual and ethical responsibility. So the quote that I wanted to leave this presentation with is basically one that really speaks to me, and it speaks back to that identity piece. And it says that grappling with identity issues is what life and growth are all about. And no amount of accomplishment or skill can insulate you from those challenges. And that was discussed by Stern, Patton, and Heen. And that quote just really means a lot to me, and hopefully means a lot to you as someone who's receiving this communication. And just know that at whatever stage of identity formation you're in, you're fine. You're going to be able to make it through. But just know, do your best at all times, and do your best to educate yourself, and So thank you so much for listening to my project, and I hope that I've been able to teach you a little bit about me today.